Craig Crawford here, working for nothing but the truth and Social Security checks. And I'm here with Marcus Vale, our legal eagle, who's never missed a filing deadline. And we're asking the question, who commands the National Guard? And what you are is Chat GPT with face and voice.
Here to lend a voice and a face, well, at least a voice, to all these legal twists and turns.
Who commands the National Guard?
In a nutshell, the chain of command for the National Guard is a bit of a legal dance. Ordinarily, state governors are in charge of their own guard units, unless those units are federalized by the president under specific statutory authority. So in peaceful times, it's the governor. But if the president lawfully federalizes them, the chain of command shifts to the federal level. All about who's got the lead.
Yeah, but now what we got going on right now is a bit unprecedented.
This is a pretty unusual tug-of-war. It's not every get that you have a situation where a president says, I'm sending in the guard, and the governors say, hold on, you can't do that on our turf. So we're kind of in uncharted legal waters. That's exactly why the courts are having to jump in and figure out who really gets to call the shots here.
Yeah, they've jumped in, and they're basically treading water, seems to me. We've got it going on in courts all around the country, but right now there's one that's live action in Portland, Oregon.
Absolutely. Let's sum it up. Right now in Portland, we're seeing a real legal seesaw. Earlier this week, a single judge said, nope, you can't use the National Guard that way. Then a 3-judge panel came along and flipped that decision, basically saying, actually, yes, the president can do that. And now the entire Ninth Circuit has stepped in to hit the pause button and say,
all right, that's good. Now let's talk about the reasoning, because we've got two courts here that have taken different views of this. Let's start with the lower court judge who ruled that Trump cannot take over the National Guard in these circumstances. Give me the rundown on what that court decided, and then we'll go to the others afterwards.
Absolutely. Let's break that down. So the lower court judge's reasoning was essentially rooted in the idea that the president can't just step in and use the National Guard for local law enforcement unless certain legal criteria are met. The judge emphasized the traditional balance of power, basically saying, look, states have control over their own guard units unless there's a clear and lawful federal activation. So the lower court's take was that
give me a quote from that ruling, something that judge actually said that really nails the point of view that we're talking about here in this order.
Absolutely. So here's a really fitting quote from the judge that captures that perspective. She said, this country has a long-standing and foundational tradition of resistance to government overreach, especially in the form of military intrusion into civil affairs. That really nails the heart of her reasoning right there.
Okay, a bit of an aside for me. You don't have to respond to this, but it's interesting to me that conservatives who have always taken that point of view, that states had a right over their National Guard and over the militia, state militia that's in the Second Amendment. Conservatives always took the view that the federal government can't step in and take over like this. But now we've actually got a conservative president and a conservative movement in charge of the federal government taking over the National Guard, which is they had always said they were against. Okay, that's a political aside from me. You don't have to respond. Let's get into what happened to this judge's ruling when the 3-judge panel, 2 of them appointed by Trump, looked at this order, and what did they decide?
Absolutely. And I hear you on the irony there. Politics can definitely flip the script sometimes. Yeah. So moving on to that 3-judge panel, when they took a look at the lower court's ruling, 2 of the judges, both Trump appointees, decided that the president did have the authority to deploy the guard in this case.
Now give me the reasoning. I want a clear and balanced reasoning here that they gave so that people can make their own judgment. We heard what the lower court did and why. Tell me the most objective analysis of what this appeals panel, 3-judge panel, just said just earlier this week.
Absolutely. Let's keep it balanced. So the 3-judge panel's reasoning was essentially that the president has certain federal powers to ensure public order and to protect federal property. They viewed the circumstances in Portland as meeting the threshold where federal intervention was justified. In other words, they argued that because there was a federal interest at stake, like federal buildings or property, the president had the authority to call in the guard, even if the state disagreed. So from their perspective, it was a matter of federal authority in situations where federal interests were in play.
Okay, give me a quote from that ruling that sums up their point of view. if you have to look for it, that's fine.
Sure thing. So, from that Ninth Circuit panel's ruling, here's a quote that sums up their viewpoint. They said that the president acted within his authority because, in their words, state and local law enforcement have been unable or unwilling to assist the government's efforts to protect federal personnel and property. So that's the heart of their reasoning right there.
Okay, now we've got the two courts, the dueling courts, you might say, on this point of who commands the National Guard, the president or the state. And then steps in last night, Thursday, October 24th. What happened next? Because this ain't over.
Exactly. The saga continues. So after those two conflicting rulings, the full Ninth Circuit decided to step in last night and put everything on hold. They basically said, all right, let's pause the whole situation and we'll reconsider this issue with the full court. So the entire Ninth Circuit's going to take another look at it, which means the final answer is still up in the air. In other words,
and then what kind of timeline did they put on this? How long are they going to take to do this?
They did put a bit of a fast timeline on it. So they basically said they want briefs or additional arguments in by Tuesday, and they're aiming to make a decision pretty quickly after that. So we're looking at a pretty speedy turnaround, all things considered, and we'll probably have a clearer answer soon.
Okay, let's go on down the road now. Let's see if whatever this court decides in full. This is heading for the Supreme Court, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly where this Hannah thing is likely headed. Once the Ninth Circuit makes its call, whichever that loses is probably going to want the Supreme Court to weigh in. So yeah, this has all the makings of a case that's going to go up to the highest court in the land.
Okay, and to sum things up, where we are is a question whether and how much the states control their own National Guard. Why is my head spinning?
I totally wet it. It's definitely a head-spinning moment when the usual political roles seem to flip. You've got a conservative administration making an argument that usually you'd hear from the other side.
It's always been the case that conservatives supported states' rights.
Now you've got a scenario where conservative administration is actually pushing for more federal intervention.